yourself?
I've got my screen.
I beg your pardon?
I've got my screen.
You can see yourself on the screen.
Yeah.
Now, what does it say at the bottom?
Oh, well, it says security participants share screen.
All right. You can see share screen, right?
Yeah.
Can you see a little arrow going up?
Yeah.
Not the green one.
Oh, not the green one.
Beside
The white
green
one. Yeah.
Yes. Press it.
And it says one participant can share screen at a time, or multiple participants can share screen.
Yes, and under that?
Multiple participants.
Yes, under that?
Advanced sharing options.
Yes, click that.
Right. And it says how many participants can share: one, multiple, and then only host or all participants.
Yes, then you click all participants.
Yeah. Oh, well, that looks straightforward.
So he should be able, when the time comes, for him to share his screen.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
All right.
I'll do that.
Right, then. Good luck.
Back. Anyway, right.
See you.
Yeah.
Hello, Caesar. How are you?
Good.
Hey, Katrina. Andre.
Are you alone?
Who's this?
You've got a different name on you, Claude.
I know, because Jan Barnett is one of the speakers, and she's just putting some lipstick on and doing her hair and everything else. And I suggested she go use my mirrors because they're bigger than hers in the car.
That's too much information.
I know. I'm just going to embarrass her. Anyway, she said she'll be back in a sec. So she's working from my place because to make sure that nothing goes wrong.
Right.
Not that anything will go wrong, but so. So Mari, where are you from? You're muted.
She's muted.
Okay. There's Ivan, Ivantich.
Hello. Yeah, it's yeah. I'm in Melbourne here.
Okay, good on you. Thank you. Welcome, Andre, too.
Yes. No, we're not able to speak, are we?
Well, we can for the moment. I think we can for the moment.
Oh, I see. I noticed some of them have their speaker off. That's all.
Oh yeah,
So,
we'll be on, and the host will turn us all off. Yeah?
Turn us all off. That's right. Oh well, nice to say hello to you all.
We've still got about 20 minutes, I think, till 15 minutes
Yes.
to get to know each other.
Right. Okay. Mari's got her audio off, her speaking thing off here.
Yeah. So. Is she from Melbourne too? Is she, you know? Is Murray from Melbourne?
Oh, no, I've no idea.
Okay.
She and I were the first to arrive on the scene.
Okay, okay. Well, we've got people from all around the different parts of the globe joining us today, so it's good. Yeah.
What about yourself?
I'm in Sydney. I'm the convener for Pax Christi New South Wales and the national president as well. But I'm in Sydney, so yeah, yeah. But I do everything that Caesar tells me to do.
That's a lie.
So we could go in and out again, couldn't we? Because we've got a fair while to wait. Do something
We've
else.
still got about 10 minutes. We've got about 10 minutes at least, yeah. 10.
It had 1:30 on the thing that I got, so that's all.
It was 1:30 to open up, so we can have a chat like we are now. But the actual webinar starts at 2 o'clock. Yeah?
You can blank your video, Angela, and then no one knows what you're doing.
One of our Sydney members said she's going to turn the video off and do her ironing while she's listening.
I'll disappear. How do I change to video?
Just
At the
blank
bottom,
it.
How to do
the bottom of your screen there, it says
What do I
stop
do?
video.
Stop the video.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then click on that.
A new
Click on that.
company.
Yeah.
Stop the
Click
video.
on the, do you see that bottom
And I
of the screen?
disappear. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
There's Harry.
Yeah.
Hello,
Hi.
Harry.
God.
I'm going to.
Hello, Harry.
Hi.
You look as though you're a pilot in a plane.
Well, I feel like one at the moment. Just a minute. Ah. Okay.
Jan Barnett.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Jan.
That, Jan,
This thing.
this is the speaker.
I'm trying to get the share screen things going. I can't.
Oh, I'm on now, am I?
You are, yes. Hello.
Can you hear me now, Angela?
Yes. Oh, I see.
Yes, yes, I can hear you. But
thank you.
I've put myself off the video, so I don't know where we go from here. Doesn't really matter.
Just a minute. I think I'll have to disappear and reappear.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Good.
Yes.
Can
you hear me?
I can hear you okay, yeah.
Can you hear me, Kevin?
Yes, good. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
How you going? Yeah, good to see you. Yeah. From a dreary Melbourne afternoon here.
It's been on and off in Sydney, so some of it's been terrible and some of it's been lovely.
Right.
Yeah.
Hello, Katrina.
Who's that?
How are you?
Oh, hello, Bernadine.
Where have I seen you before? It was great this morning, wasn't it?
It was good, yeah.
Yeah. And thanks for your help, Katrina. I've learned something new.
It's good to learn something new every day, isn't it?
It is, yes.
About computers. Yeah.
I see that Erin has joined us from Brussels. It's 10 to 6 in the morning there.
Yes,
Oh.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Ah,
It's nice to see you.
thank you.
That's as loud as it gets.
That's as loud as it's going to get. Your choice.
There's Kevin Liston again. How are you, Kevin?
Who's that? I'm good, Bernadine. I'm good. How are you?
Yes, it was great this morning. I'm looking forward to the notes.
It was beautiful. Yes, it was.
It was, yes. Everything connected so well.
Yes, it did. It did. Annette is a lovely thinker.
It is, yes.
Good way of putting things. Yep.
That's right. Hello, Rita.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Who's
good.
saying hello? I can't tell. Bernadine.
Bernadine, yes, yes.
Hello, how are you?
Very good, yes.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
What's
Hello,
it like
Rita.
up north today?
Oh, it's quite good. We've got sun a little bit on and off. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
New Zealand's coming.
Good to see New Zealand there. Hello, Bridget.
Hello.
Oh,
oh my goodness. Hello, Jan.
Hello.
Hello, Pearl.
Oh, Andy.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Andy.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
You can hear me?
Yes.
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Really clearly.
Where's Pearl? Is Pearl there?
Pearl
Yes.
is here.
I'm
Hello,
here.
Pearl. Hello.
Hello. How are
Katrina
you?
saying hi to yourself.
Hi, sister.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Mari, where are you? Where are you?
I'm at Croydon.
Croydon, Melbourne, or Croydon, Sydney?
Croydon, Sydney.
Oh, okay, okay.
Oh.
I'm at
There's
Edinburgh.
only one Croydon down here.
Yeah.
Rita, where are you?
Hi,
Rita?
Melbourne. Who's speaking to me?
Mari. Mari in Croydon.
Oh,
Mari,
Melbourne, Victoria.
All right, thank you.
Hang on, Sister Jo, remember?
I see that Bridget had joined us from Tiver land.
Yes.
Hi, Bridget.
Who's Erin? I can't see Erin. Can't see Erin. She's in Brussels. She can't even do it.
Hopefully Kevin is joining us. I did remind him.
Hi, Jan. Hi.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Jan. Good afternoon. Jan and Claude.
Hello, Rita.
Hi.
Jan, how you going?
Hi, Claude.
Marita.
Hi, Jan. Hi,
And
Claude.
Erin. Is it
Pat.
cold there, Erin?
Hello, Pat.
Hi, yes, I thought you'd recognise the voice, Claude.
Oh, no. The master's voice. We always listen to hear the.
Oh, something fell over. Hi, Angela.
Hello, how are you, Pat?
Okay.
I'm just scrolling through I don't get all the frames on. I'm only on an iPad, so I don't get all the frames.
So am I.
visiting all the-
Hi, Joan. Hello, Joan.
Hit up in the left corner, Angela, and you get, I've got 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 on my iPad.
Oh, have you? How did you do that? I could only get 6 at a time.
Turn your pad the other way.
We are nearly halfway there with 38 people. We have registrations almost at 90, I think. So we are almost halfway there. In the next 3 minutes, the others will all turn up.
Yes.
There's we've had 3 people who have registered but can't attend. Lynn and Ian Fry. Do people know them?
Yes.
Lynn will probably not last the night. She's very ill.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's very sad. And the other person, Deborah, has grandmother duties today, so she'll catch up later.
That's important.
Hi, Jude Butcher.
Hi, how are you, Pat?
Hello,
Good, thank
Jude.
you.
Oh, hello, Jude.
Hi, Rita.
Hi.
Rita, can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes, loud and clear, Jeff. That's great.
Hi, Benny.
And we've got people from overseas here today as well, which
We've
is
got the Philippines.
amazing.
I can see 2 from the Philippines at least. Loretta and Jasmine.
Lovely.
And somebody from the US. two. Hello.
Andre.
Andre.
I saw a hand.
Hello.
I saw your hand go up, Andre. Thank you.
And Erin, of course, from Pax Christi International, Brussels, in New Zealand.
Wow.
We're very lucky to have this.
Thanks, Erin. Welcome.
Yes.
There will be some from Canada.
Andrew Kerr is Harry.
Harry is me. No, you're not going to be able to see me. Luckily for you, I'm on a different computer and I've got two computers mixed up. So to function properly, I'll have to stay on this one, which doesn't have a camera. But I'm here, so you can talk to me. I think the shared screen is switched on for those who want to do that. It's the first time I've done anything about that. And I think we'll be able to get into groups without any trouble. So we're all set to go. It's up to Caesar to push the boat out.
Give it a couple of minutes because we are now at 49. Just 2 more minutes. And then, Harry, you're going to mute all.
No. This is the last one.
Susan. Harry.
Oh, that's right. She's talked about him.
Hello, Anne.
Brings me so.
Hi, Mary.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, Anne.
Hello. Hello.
Who's that?
Anne
Lanyon.
I think we can make a start. We are at 50 now. Harry, can you mute everyone?
I'll have to ask everybody to mute themselves. I think that's the best way.
Okay,
I can't
please.
sort of got a bit confused with all the mechanics of the thing.
Okay.
So
please mute yourselves.
Except the speakers, of course.
Please mute yourselves. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay.
I think they're all muted.
We are at 50. There should be another 40 or so coming. Hopefully they'll come very soon.
Another one arrived.
Yep.
I think we might just go ahead and they'll come when they come.
Yes. Yeah. Just before we go ahead, just make a note that when we have questions to be discussed, they should be on chat box. So chat box is something on your right of the screen. Put your questions there, your comments, and we can discuss them later. As much as possible, we're trying to avoid direct, voice communication because it creates a lot of confusion, etc. And secondly, if you wanted to focus on the speaker alone, use the single screen. At the top of the screen on your right, there is a view icon. And if you press that view icon, you will have 3 offerings, a gallery view. Just 1 minute, it has gallery view, speaker view, and full screen. That's on the top right hand. I mean, it's as you face the screen. At the top, there's a view icon there.
So if you press speaker view, you get the person who's speaking at the moment. And then if you want to, you can go back to gallery view with everybody. Basically how it works.
So let's commence with acknowledgement of the First Peoples, as we usually do in such meetings. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this meeting is today. I pay my respects to the Wurundjeri elders of the Kulin Nation, past, present, and emerging, and recognize their continuing connection to community, water, and land over which sovereignty was not ceded. I extend my respect to other Indigenous Australians who may be present with us today. My name is Cesar De Mello, and I'm speaking on behalf of Pax Christi Australia. And on his behalf, I'm so happy to welcome you all to this ecumenical webinar. We're delighted to have international guests from a range of countries, including the US, Canada, the European Union or EU, India, Philippines, Japan, New Zealand. I hope I've not missed any countries. And for some participants, it is midnight now or very early morning. So thank you for making yourselves available. I also thank those who have joined us from other parts of Australia, those who have joined us from Victoria. I also note among us the presence of supporters and members of the Pax Christi family, including Erin Green, Brussels-based coordinator for communications and the Asia Pacific region for Pax Christi International. We have Harry Kerr, who's doing the technology for us, but he's also the convener of Pax Christi Victoria. And we have with us also Father Claude Mostovic, convener of Pax Christi New South Wales and president of Pax Christi Australia. To provide just a brief background to this webinar, I begin by saying that Pax Christi has had a continuing focus on the issues of militarism and related concerns. Last November, we had a webinar that focused on a militarized or militarizing Asia Pacific. The encyclical Fratelli Tutti provides us with a rich wellspring of reflections, insight, and ways forward for responding to such issues, hence this webinar. It is amazing what a Pope can do. The Pope enjoys an unparalleled global platform to influence the world beyond the Catholic Church he leads. And popes have repeatedly used that opportunity to do just that. To illustrate with just two examples, Pope Leo XIII, his encyclical in 1893 called Rerum Novarum, or in English, Of Things New, put a sharp spotlight on the dignity of work and workers in a changing modern world. Almost 100 years later, in 1991, in the encyclical Centesimus Annus, which means 100th year, Pope John Paul condemned the excess of capitalism, the idolatry of the market, and the insanity of the arms race that is still with us. In these times, we have a Pope who speaks to the Catholic Church and to the global community. He has been a relentless advocate for a more humane world, irrespective of denominations, faiths, and geography, and ethnicity, while deeply committed to the marginalized. Language is shaped by our times, is visionary, is pro-people and planet, caring and prophetic in both senses of the word. An Argentinian, Pope Francis brings to his role a wider lens than just an Italian or European one. His latest major contribution is a social encyclical in the great tradition of Popes Leo XIII, Paul VI, John Paul II, and others. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis mute yourself, please. And speaker, please mute yourself. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis challenged us to treat our planet as our common home with an urgent call to an ecological conversion. Building on this encyclical, he has moved from the planet to a community, a whole human community grounded in fellowship and friendship. Fratelli Tutti offers a wide sweep of the state of our world, the roots of the tensions, and a fresh approach. It is not one that can be dispatched with one bite at the cherry, as it were, as it probes various facets interlinked within an all-encompassing framework. We are fortunate to have today 3 speakers who will help explore some of these facets. They have accepted the challenge, the difficult task of doing just that in 10 minutes or so each. So before I introduce the speakers, again, I remind you of the single screen advice. The first speaker is Father Kevin Lenehan, who will speak on the vision of Fratelli Tutti. Dr. Lenehan is a priest of the Diocese of Ballarat and is currently Master of the Catholic Theological College in Melbourne, a college of the University of Divinity. After degrees from Monash University and the University of Divinity, he did a doctorate at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium with a doctoral thesis, a dissertation on revelation and religion in the thought of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and René Girard. His fields of interest are fundamental theology, theological anthropology, and religious education. A regular contributor in faith formation, religious education, and liturgical ministry. He's also a member in the Australian Catholic Church's Plenary Council Discernment and Writing Group on Conversion, Renewal, and Reform. Father Kevin.
Thanks, Caesar. Thank you. So, hello, everybody. Nice to be with you. Good afternoon or good morning around the world. I'm very honoured to be part of this group. I admire the work of Pax Christi International and have been loosely associated for 35 years or so since I was a young student myself. So I'm delighted to be back in touch. Caesar and I are parishioners together here in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and it was through his invitation that I'm here, and I'm pleased to be so. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the other speakers, Jan and Andy. I myself am not by trade an ethics specialist or a specialist of Catholic social teaching, so I bring to Fratelli Tutti, I guess, a more general theological and pastoral interest as a Catholic, as a parishioner and priest in a parish, as well as working in the theology area. So I'm very pleased to be with you today. And Caesar's invitation was to give sort of some general thoughts or overview of the themes of Fratelli Tutti. So I'm going to try to do that by giving some general rather than more specific thoughts at the moment. Many of us I know will have looked at the document, so I don't want to repeat there. So let me just pick up here. Can you see my screen? Caesar,
Yeah.
can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Okay, thanks. Great. So maybe I thought it might be useful just to think of Fratelli Tutti in line with the Pope's, if you like, published magisterium as we have it today. Since he's come to office, there's a number of documents that we really do need to read together, I think, in a sense, to get a feel for what his big ideas are and how they fit together. So remember back 2013, Laudate Si, the encyclical on the care of the earth, the care of our common home. And in the same year, his programmatic statement, Evangelii Gaudium, on the proclamation, the mission of the church in a very new culture. It was really these documents where he started talking about that we live not so much in an era of change, but in a change of era, and particularly in terms of the church's mission, that in a way the coming apart of that Western Christendom model of church into a more pluralistic, multicultural, including secular and non-religious voices all around the world. And so how does the church reshape its mission in face of this? Then in years to come, his document on family life and love in the family, Amoris Laetitia, a document on the universal call to holiness, Gaudete and Exultate, also in there a document on young people and discernment. And these very much were spiritual reflections that he brought into a very broad audience, picking up, really emphasizing that we live as people in relationships. And all these three documents really focus on how we live out our relationships, our belonging to each other in the world. It's a key theme of his. A significant document behind Fratelli Tutti is the document he co-signed in Abu Dhabi in 2019 with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar on his visit to Abu Dhabi there, a document on human fraternity for world peace and living together. And this co-signed document is very much behind Fratelli Tutti and in its thinking. We had then last year the Apostolic Exhortation after the Synod of Bishops on the Amazon area, again linking together the issues of environmental care and spirituality and the care for the local communities there. And then also at the end of last year, Fratelli Tutti, his new encyclical. So, I mean, there is a certain hierarchy in church documents, as you know. An encyclical is the most serious, the most significant document that a pope can issue. And I think we can see here very much where he lines up his encyclicals on Laudato Si and then Fratelli Tutti. He treats both of them, I think, as his most serious statements and sees them very much as him exercising his vocation in the footsteps of Francis, Francis of Assisi, the great prophet of creation and of social harmony, social friendship. So he sees himself very much linked into these two encyclicals. And of course, he's also published a number of interviews through his life. As any pope, every word he speaks is written down. This pope's exposed himself more than any other because he was televising his daily mass. So even his short reflections and homilies at the daily mass of a morning from the Santa Marta College were being broadcast around the world. So he's exposed himself very much to every waking thought being printed and known around. And we really do have to take any pope's total work together, the homilies, the letters, the occasional speeches, as well as the formal documents. And many of you may have come across this recent collection of reflections where he, with a type of reporter, Austin Everay, worked together, an interviewer, put together a set of reflections, particularly on the opportunity that opens up as a result of the global pandemic. I think it's fair to say that that Francis's pontificate, in a sense, will be looked at as a response to two crises, the global financial crisis of 2007, where he was still Archbishop in Latin America, and very much that crisis shaped up his response as the leader of a local church in Latin America in the time of global financial crisis. And then I think the health crisis of 2000, I think looking back, we'll see those two global moments of reckoning, in a way, which for Francis, out of his spirituality, creates moments of discernment. The crisis creates the call to reflect, to discern, to turn more deeply to the gospel and how to live out the gospel. And that's, so his call about let us dream. Let's think, what have we learned? What's been revealed to us through these crises, the financial crisis and the economic and the health crisis, and how do we respond? How do we become more human and more human in relationship with God as a result of these crises? So I think through his whole magisterium, we can talk about a number of key themes that emerge for Francis. He's very conscious of a set of threats to the human family, to its environment, to our habitat, and to the common good of all. And he names issues such as the forced migrations of people, the degradation of human life and human dignity, the exploitation of people so much, the unregulated capitalist market, and the drive for endless growth and profit that only operates on the production of a culture of waste and indifference to people, that people become consumed in the system driving for profit. The environmental crisis is very much on his mind, but he sees it not only as in a sense, as a crisis of the natural world, but that's a crisis of the human world too. Human communities, human families, human workers, human women and children are all in one way parts of the environmental crisis that's going on around us. And then too, in more recent times, perhaps very attention to the social polarization, the rise of certain popularisms around the world that are reactive and resistive in many ways to the sort of open society, to the society of encounter that he would point to, and the political radicalization that comes up to that. And then he sees the response then, the Christian then called to respond, motivated by the gospel, but also by our sense of a common humanity and our common creation by the Creator. The need to respond. A key theme of his from Laudate Si through is that of the integrated ecology of life, that every aspect of life, the physical, the spiritual, the intellectual, the political, the social, every aspect of life is bound together and bound together. And where one part of that ecology, that web is interfered with or broken, the other parts suffer too. And so he starts to call for this integrated ecology of life that takes into account life in all its forms. And that's very open to the spiritual dimension of life in all its forms. We can really feel his Jesuit formation in this area, that the spiritual is to be found in every aspect of life, from the smallest atoms right through to the great projects of history, that every part of life has its spiritual dimension and calls us by that spiritual dimension into relationship with each other, with the whole of life, with God, the creator of all things. And the way into that sort of spiritual renewal is through the practice of human encounter, dialogue, and enrichment through others. This is a common theme that runs through him. In Francis's mind, nobody stands alone, or if we do stand alone, it's only to enter more deeply into our own spiritual awareness to realize just how embedded we are into natural and cultural systems and groupings that link us together. And we become more and more human, not by standing away from, or he keeps using the word indifferent to what's going on around us, but by entering more openly, more freely, more completely, including with the moments of self-sacrifice and perseverance that takes to enter into those relationships. Globally, this calls, in a sense, for a new type of politics and a new type of economics that begins from the concrete, from the periphery, from the ground, and opens out to include all. So he sees here very much rather than a top-down model or the Western bureaucracy's idea of central bureaucracy that spreads out and centrally plans the whole of its state. He very much sees that there's a much more complex political reality going on that begins by attending to the concrete, to the ground, and builds together to include then all within the group. And this then creates to what perhaps is his most important idea in a sense, that his promotion of a non-apocalyptic view of history and politics. That the history and politics is the field of human freedom and human hard work, and through patience and encounter and dialogue and the hard work of walking with each other, we can avoid those dualistic either-or clashes that see, if you like, a clash of civilizations, or a clash between good and evil, or a clash between Christendom and the secular modernity on the other hand. So avoiding these dualistic views of reality, where it's one or the other. He says we need to look further, deeper into reality to see the unity, the togetherness that can even exist within these often quite different, diverse forms of life, and to take the steam out of those apocalyptic narratives that push towards aggression, conflict, competition, war, the survival of the fittest. He sees very much the work of the church to, if I take the steam out of those generative narratives. If any of you have read any of René Girard, you'll be very familiar with that language. And this all comes together towards what he would see to be a new sort of humanism. And this is harking back before Vatican II to the work of Father de Lubac, a new sort of humanism that is gospel inspired but open to all, and comes about through this fraternity and social friendship. So Fratelli Tutti, this is his call, a new sort of fraternity between all women and men, where we are fellow travellers of the same flesh, children of the same earth, which is our common home. And that's very much harking back, if you remember a couple of years earlier, that Abu Dhabi document where he and the Imam talk out of a believer's position in the two traditions of Islam and Christianity, that our faith leads believers to see in the other a brother or sister to be supported and loved. Through faith in God, who has created the universe, creatures and all human beings are called to express this human fraternity by safeguarding creation and the entire universe. So can you see here how he links together the care of creation and the building of human social community? These two things are wed together. Thanks, Caesar. I'll bring this together now. So then I think we can see where do these ideas come from. I think for him, we see a whole long tradition of thinking about social friendship that reaches back to Aristotle, to Aristotle's teaching on friendship as a social, a political, a cultural force, of course, to the gospel, to Jesus. I think in this idea of fraternity, we see the Pope saying, look at the French Revolution, look at the foundation of Western modern society is in that program originating out of the French Revolution, out of Western Enlightenment, promoting liberty, equality, and fraternity. And I think the Pope's suggesting that yes, we need to promote liberty, we need to promote equality, but without fraternity, without social friendship, without human community, the other two can turn into monsters and can become oppressive to us. So we need the balance, he says. I think he's saying that Western culture hasn't yet realised its own vision. It hasn't yet realised its own complete picture. And so then we have in the document itself a number of chapters. Many of you will have read these, so I won't go through them. It's a type of see, judge, act methodology where he names a number of concerns or challenges, threats to human sociality that he sees, that he reflects in the light of Scripture, the Good Samaritan parable, and in the light of Catholic social teaching about those. And then he then he provides some suggestions about how we move forward on those key issues, and these would be close to the heart of Pax Christi, Chapter 4 on migration, Chapter 5 on human dignity and a new type of politics that is based in solidarity. Chapter 6 on dialogue and friendship, and Chapter 7 particularly on peace, a reflection on the just war and the death penalty, where he really embeds now into magisterial teaching in the Catholic social tradition the moving away from the just war theory and the death penalty as options, harking back really to Benedict XV during World War I, who called the war a useless struggle, you know, that while we might be able to think theoretically about conditions for a just war, the increase of technology and biological and chemical warfare means that there is no instance at the moment where you could name the conditions for a just war to exist. So while it might exist in theory, it doesn't happen on the ground. And likewise for the death penalty, while the right to a state to protect itself against notorious criminals might exist, the means of detention these days are so sophisticated that there would not be likely to exist in reality an example where the death penalty could be applied. So just to wrap that up. So thank you. That's to give a quick summary, maybe some ideas, a bit of the background, and then to focus in on some of the key themes of his chapters. Thanks very much, Caesar. I'll just get out of here.
Can you... Oh. I've lost you.
I'm here.
1 minute.
Just too many people that can't see it.
Yeah. Can you see me now?
Yes.
All good.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Lots to digest. We will do that. Our next speaker is Sister Jan Barnett. She's a sister of St. Joseph. She's Justice Coordinator for the Sisters of St. Joseph, as well as a member of the Congregational Coalition for Justice. A former teacher, principal, and consultant in Catholic secondary schools, and lecturer at the Australian Catholic University. She has degrees from the University of New England, a master's degree in religious education from Seattle University, and a PhD in leadership from the Australian Catholic University. She has served as a member of a congregation's leadership team and has assisted NetAct, a group that links justice, welfare, and educational agencies. She works with educational, church, and interfaith groups, and she will address collaboration, not confrontation, among faiths. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much, Caesar. Kevin, I loved your reflection. I loved your reflection on life as an encounter, seeing in the other the sister or brother to be seen and loved. I think it's the central message that we all need to hold as we move into this time. One of my most vivid memories as a teenager was of a day when our family was driving past the Baha'i temple on the northern beaches of Sydney. Dad stopped the car, and at a time when even visiting other Christian churches was frowned upon, he gave us an amazing tour of this place. Inside, around the walls, there were symbols of the major world religions. Dad explained that the Baha'i teaches that the temple's a space for all religions, and that the 9 doors opening onto the grounds signified the unity of all. It was a lesson I've never forgotten about my father and about the Baha'i, a lesson for all of us that Kevin's really shared with us as we reflect on the message of Fratelli Tutti, and especially the chapter I've been asked to reflect on, which is chapter 8. Kevin, you've given us a really impressive and clear outline of its vision, as well as the background, and I'd like to focus on the development of this in the concluding teaching of chapter 8. I liked your description of the encyclical as something of an extended meditation on the call for all religions to influence political and economic life in the 21st century. As you've pointed out, the fundamental lesson is a simple one, even if we have to admit, and I have to admit, that the encyclical is incredibly long, not easily digestible, and often dogged, as we've heard, by exclusive language. The essential messages of the first 7 chapters underpin those of chapter 8, and they call us as Christians over and over, I think, to collaboration and solidarity, to say no to building walls, to say yes to building bridges, to strengthen the seeds of peace and justice, with dialogue, as Kevin's pointed out, being pivotal and the central tool for resolving conflict and confrontation. Because we're all in the same boat, because life is an encounter, we know also that in a globalised and interconnected world, only together can we save. Can we be saved? And this is what Francis points out. Only together can we learn to reverence each person. Only together can we come to respect the difference of each and utilise these differences to strengthen collaboration, not confrontation. We must, Francis exhorts us, dare to care. Chapter 8 picks up all the themes that Kevin has reminded us of explicitly and absolutely. And I'd like to focus on 3 aspects of this chapter. First of all, as people of faith, in all our diverse religions, we do hold common fundamental values, and we're called by these, beyond the material, to what's at the heart of our beliefs, to what is transcendent. Secondly, we're summoned unambiguously by our religions as sisters and brothers in faith to build solidarity and community among us. And thirdly, Francis reminds us, we're impelled by these very religious beliefs and values to witness and build together justice, peace, and authentic community in our world. It's our religions that Francis insists in this chapter that impel us to move beyond the private sphere to public involvement. We can't remain on the sidelines in the building of a better world, but we're driven by our religious beliefs to speak together and work together for a better world. Not in a party political or ideological way, Francis says, but all the same, and this is one of my favourite emphases in the encyclical, engaging politically to strengthen dialogue, cooperative sharing, solidarity and action. And as Francis points out, and his close collaboration with the Sheikh in 2019 demonstrates, this dialogue is central to collaboration and underpins all our efforts to nurture the seeds of peace and justice. And so this chapter reminds us, I think, that it's not because, that it is because of and not in spite of our religious traditions that we're called to join in dialogue, to share our values and establish the bonds spoken of over and over in the encyclical. Emphasising this, and it's one of his favourite themes we know, Francis describes dialogue as the way we come to recognise and reverence our common values, to learn and appreciate and respect our differences, and to build friendship and action. It's out of this dialogue, he believes, that we will build bridges, strengthen the culture of encounter, establish the seeds of peace, and promote the common good across all of society. These convictions underpin Francis' concerns about religious prejudice and hostility, his underscoring of the fact that violence doesn't have any basis in our fundamental religious convictions, but only in their distortion, in the erroneous interpretations of religious texts. Hence, we can understand his deep apprehension about religious extremism and aggression. And it's here we see Francis' most ardent entreaty his yearning for an enhanced consciousness of our common identity and for a greater appreciation of the solemn and universal duty to solidarity and action. It's this we know and we hold that's at the core of the gospel message, and Kevin has emphasised the basis of that for us. It's at the heart of all that's taught across all the major religions. But as Francis points out, it's also at the heart of some of our greatest challenges today. The messages and implications of Fratelli Tutti reflect, I think, the central message of Francis' whole pontificate. And as so many scholars have pointed out, it's the natural companion to Laudato Si, expressing in concrete terms his deep yearning for collaboration, not confrontation, in our care of earth and of each other. For me, I think, and I think Francis intends this, Fratelli Tutti does raise specific questions for us as church right across the world, but also specifically for us in Australia. And as I've reflected on these in the past few weeks, the Pope's words are both challenging and inescapable if we really take them to heart. They relate to solidarity, religious, economic and social, and the inclusion that Francis insists must be at the heart of our lives in all those areas. As I've looked at the Australian Church in the past few weeks, I've actually wondered about the real impact of this encyclical on our church here, in our dioceses, parishes, our Catholic organisations, our media. How have our bishops and priests responded to this call of Pope Francis in their homilies, in their public statements, in their advocacy and action? And how have we as church witnessed explicitly to solidarity and collaboration, particularly with our Muslim brothers and sisters? One example stands out for me. 2 days after the New Zealand Royal Commission into the Christchurch massacres, Australia launched an inquiry itself into extremism, specifically right-wing extremism. But a late intervention by the Home Affairs Minister shifted its emphasis, and it ended up focusing specifically on Islamic extremism. So we moved from viewing Muslims as victims to seeing them first of all as suspects. And I've been asking myself in these weeks, what did I or what did we do to express solidarity with the Islamic community at this moment? And how did we as church express and witness to our solidarity and support? It's a question, as we know, Patrick McInerney points out over and over, demanding much more public witness from us as a Christian community. The other second area I've been wondering about is about the response of the Australian Church to the refusal of the Australian government to sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And I know this is a real issue for Pax Christi. The third example I'd like to reflect on, and you might have guessed this one, is about the Pope's call for inclusion. To me, as to many of us, there's a clear irony in this encyclical, in the Pope's appeal for inclusion, in a document where the language clearly contradicts this. The sexist title of the encyclical, the constant references to man and mankind, and even the references to God as Father and the use of fraternity concern me as a woman. And as well, as we know in chapter 8, all the examples given are those of men. Francis of Assisi, Martin Luther King, Desmond Tutu, Mahatma Gandhi and Charles de Foucault. They clearly cut across the overall longing of the encyclical for concrete inclusion. It's a shame that language has at times undermined the power of the document. But of course, I have to keep reminding myself, as we all do, that when I become disturbed by these realities, that Francis, like all of us, is human. And the fact that he's male, South American, and a Catholic cleric help us to understand his perspective. And while I think this is a reality that, yes, must be acknowledged by us, it must also be challenged. And I think it's what Francis is calling us to, actually. Additionally, though, if he is verbose and not as inclusive as I'd like, I suppose it's also a reminder to me to look at the plank in my own eye and to continue the dialogue to which he calls us very, very explicitly. Nevertheless, this incongruity aside, I think this Pope's been amazing in his witness to the gospel, and that's been clearly articulated by Kevin. Thank you very much. I've loved this Pope's commitment to earth, to those who are poor, to those who have been marginalised in our world, and to those who are victims of violence. And all of those claim attention in this encyclical. I think I can claim to be one of his sincere devotees. In his humanity, his acknowledgement of his own limitations, he's been courageous, I think, and a voice and a witness for this time. I really think he's a prophetic leader, and Kevin has named this also, who can teach all of us the meaning not only of the Good Samaritan, but of the miracle of truly washing one another's feet. And so I'd like to finish with his very real appeal and yearning in his prayer at the conclusion of this encyclical. May our hearts be open to all peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognise the goodness and beauty sown in each of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. Amen.
Thank you, Jan. Very incisive and challenging. Thank you. Our next speaker is the Reverend Andy Tiver, the member of the Uniting Church in Australia. During the 2 decades with the United Church of Christ in the Philippines and with the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, you worked with indigenous communities in Mindoro and the Cordillera. Taught community work at the Ecumenical Theological Seminary in Baguio City, and engaged in disaster relief, human rights, and peace advocacy. He's also spent shorter periods in Indonesia and other parts of Southeast Asia. In Australia, he has pastored Filipino, Vietnamese, and Chin communities and is presently in congregational ministry in Eastern Melbourne. He's co-chair of the Philippine-Australian Solidarity Association and Victorian coordinator of the Promotion Church People's Response Australia. Reflecting on Australia's relations in Southeast Asia is the subject. Andy.
Thank you, Cesar. Thank you for the invitation to reflect briefly on Australia, our relationship with Southeast Asia, and this papal encyclical. It's a lot to hold together. I'm not sure that I'll actually achieve it. But what I've tried to do is read the encyclical and reflect on what does it say to us as a nation, especially in our relationships with Southeast Asia. The encyclical calls us to a universal fraternity, which I'd rather speak of as a universal solidarity. I understand why fraternity was chosen and its gesture towards the Epistle of St. Francis. Still, the sound of this gendered word clashes in an unfortunate way with the urgent social and ecclesial task of embracing gender justice. Gender justice must not also be a central part of this universal solidarity, which, as the encyclical suggests, is where there is no others, no them, there is only an us. But this can only work if we're willing to relinquish patriarchal and other forms of hierarchic power. The call to new forms of social friendship, the centrality of dialogue, importance of openness, the need for a different kind of politics, and the continual movement to include those who have been excluded will indeed be critical for the future of our global human community. If the encyclical sounds one theme for me that is louder and more clarion than all the others, it's that self-interest at an individual or a collective level, or in defending national interests, is a dead end. And that the real hope to be found is in ecstasis, going outside of ourselves, in openness and love to encounter the other. Australia has failed so many ways in our relationship with our Southeast Asian neighbours to realise the vision of solidarity that the encyclical invokes. I cannot name all the ways, but I will focus on three areas: how we fail to welcome the stranger, how our national self-interest has distorted how we reach out to our neighbour countries, and how we've become less open, more security conscious, and put militarism at the core of our national life. I acknowledge that I speak today and I stand on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. And like all the land in Australia, this land has never been ceded by its traditional owners. I live and make my living on stolen land. No Australian can walk away from this unfinished business and still with any integrity speak of justice. The failure of solidarity, this failure of solidarity is at the core of our national identity. If we gather up the now well-known, documented and impossible to ignore accounts of settler wars, massacres against First People, destruction of culture and land, the injustice that continues to be perpetrated against Aboriginal people, the conclusion is impossible to ignore that our nation is founded on what is an ongoing and continuing crime against humanity. We should not be surprised that we find it difficult to establish relationships of respect and mutuality with our Southeast Asian neighbours when colonial practices and patterns of paternalism continue to be entrenched in our collective dealings with the First People of our own nation. Over the last 22 years, Australia has hardened its heart against the stranger in need. This is clearly seen in the way that Australia treats asylum seekers. For the last 22 years, we have been in contravention of international law and have denied the basic rights of people who have come to this country to seek asylum. Australia has treated innocent people like criminals. This failure is not a failure to welcome and protect only, but through our actions, we burden and abuse them further by putting them in indefinite detention against every international norm of what is legal and just. And this same lack of hospitality has been evident in how we treated international students, the majority of whom come from Asia to study in Australia. As their numbers have increased significantly over the past 18 years, we've been content to see them as a lucrative source of income to sustain our education sector. But when COVID struck and they were no longer any economic benefit, we totally abandoned them. It was left up to community groups, migrant community organisations, food banks and pantries to provide the necessities of life. I was involved in some of this food distribution and I saw young students that were so hungry that when they received their portion, they'd go around the corner and immediately consume it. While the senseless and cruel onshore and offshore detention programs of our government consume huge amounts of resources, generate shonky contracts, there's a total decline in resources to set up those kinds of migrant settlement and inclusion programs that would really constructively welcome people into our community. Do we really think we can treat people like this and be able to keep on doing it? These asylum seekers, these new migrants, these students tell family and friends what their experience of international cruelty and neglect has been. And our reputation as a mean-spirited, self-interested nation is consolidated in the region. our national self-interest has completely distorted the way we reach out to our neighbours in the region.
True, whoever you are.
There was a time before 2014 when Australia was held in high regard internationally, especially among our neighbours in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, for being a country that had a development assistance program that was responsive to their real needs, was participatory, was supported by highly skilled people within what was then AusAid. For over a decade, conservative political parties consistently sought to undermine the confidence of Australian people in our aid program. With the Abbott government in 2013, Australia's aid program was scuttled, and our flagship aid program went from being AusAid to WasAid. AusAid as an entity was disbanded and integrated with DFAT and its vastly different agenda. And the human resource base and institutional knowledge that Australia had developed in international development was totally trashed. The aims of the development program that remained went from being targeted at the development agendas of supported countries to being directed towards buttressing our own national self-interest.
Exactly.
The amount of aid plummeted as a percentage of our GNI. The continual undermining of the importance of development assistance in the public perception has not only allowed us to become one of the lowest aid contributing nations in the OECD, but it has also made us mean-spirited people, with a majority of Australians holding negative views of development assistance, and 80% of us clearly against increasing overseas aid as a percentage of our national budget. Being a comparatively wealthy country, a disinterested aid program has in the past been critical to building relationships of understanding and trust with our neighbours. Now, whatever aid is provided comes with the assumption that this is somehow self-serving. Even this most recent COVID support for PNG and other Pacific countries is primarily because we want to secure our poorest border regions from COVID transmission. And who can forget the gross expression of Australian self-interest in regard to Timor-Leste? Australia prided ourselves in the engagement with the international peacekeeping, and then in 2004 sent ACES agents to bug the Prime Minister's office to gain economic advantage in the Timor Gap negotiations. Such ruthless and criminal action against one of the poorest countries in Asia, which we were making a pretense to assist. The scandal continues and it plays out in our courts, and the absurd charges against witness K and his lawyer, Bernard Collaery, it continues. Australia, it's become less open, more security conscious, and we've put militarism at the core of our national life. The situation in Southeast Asia at present, this present historical moment, is incredibly complex, as so much of the internal politics happening within countries is overshadowed by this posturing and military muscle flexing of these two dominant and clearly imperialist powers, China and the US. And just over the last week, we've heard the sabres of war rattling over our region, with rhetoric of potential war with China over Taiwan, and the myriad of actual war games and manoeuvring that currently is taking place in the region just over the last 2 weeks. The US has renewed its so-called pivot to Asia, first embarked on in the Obama era, proved to be a failure because the US was bogged down in the Middle East, but now revived under Biden. And the same characters formed the cast. Under Obama, Kurt Campbell was the one who designed the pivot to Asia, and now under Biden, he was rolled out on the first day of the Biden administration as the Asian coordinator. The pivot to Asia was always China containment, with a bit of a hearts and minds gloss over everything. We can expect more of the same, but now the stakes seem to be much higher. China's used the period of US lack of focus to significantly expand its hard and soft power across the region and beyond. Australia is, as usual, blindly bound by our attachment to the US alliance and follows where the US leads or fails to lead. US interests are, however, not Australia's best interests. Neither are those of China. We should not blindly follow the US, neither should we diminish or ignore the ambitions of China. The choice has never needed to be binary. And Australia has had opportunities in the past to do what Pope Francis is calling for in his encyclical, to enter into the solidarity with our neighbours and engage in dialogue over our shared concerns. The Philippines has been a focus of my engagement, and it's one example of those populist regimes that the encyclical refers to, that has a lack of concern for the vulnerable, that exploits people demagogically. President Duterte came to power through electoral victory in 2016, massive support generated by social media, later to be found out to be undergirded by infamous organisations like Cambridge Analytica and troll farms in foreign countries. Even before he took office, Duterte had launched a propaganda campaign to undermine the discourse on human rights. And then when he came to office, through clandestine agents and paid goons, he embarked on a campaign to summarily execute thousands of drug suspects. More recently, the abuse, harassment, extrajudicial killing of activists and civil society organisation leaders, which had been occurring from the beginning, but with the introduction of the National Anti-Terrorism Act in July 2020 has totally escalated. In the face of gross human rights abuses by the Duterte regime, some reliable sources say up to 30,000 people have been summarily executed in the so-called war on drugs. The Australian government has remained silent. There's currently a preliminary investigation being conducted by the International Criminal Court into President Duterte for potential crimes against humanity. Australia has been worse than silent. The draconian anti-terror laws, which are now being used against civil society activists, were drafted with the aid of the Australian government. They're modelled on our own anti-terror laws. Australia has also continued to provide significant support and training to the armed forces of the Philippines, despite the AFP's appalling human rights record. And through its visiting of forces agreement with the Philippines, we continue to engage in joint military exercises. This gross failure by Australia is in stark contrast with the appropriate action taken in response to the military coup in Myanmar, which has seen the termination of all military aid and support. Halverson and West, in a recent article, examined the history of how Australia and Philippines relate over politics and security concerns. They said that Australia always engages with its self-interest at the forefront of the relationship. This is clearly the case in the present moment, when Australia is willing to stay silent on these gross human rights abuses in exchange for the advantage it perceives it attains in the Philippines in respect to balancing Chinese influence and the so-called war on terror in the southern Philippines. In Fratelli Tutti, there is much that is said about war, but two sentences that particularly captured my attention were, "We can no longer think of war as a solution because its risks will probably always be greater than its supposed benefits. In view of this, it is very difficult nowadays to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in earlier centuries to speak of the possibility of a just war. Never again war, exclamation mark." That's in the encyclical. Australia's relationship to Southeast Asia are overshadowed, overdetermined by the possibility of armed conflict between China and the US or their proxies. Yet as the encyclical points out, such war is in no one's interest, least of all the interests of the planet. Yet over recent decades, war has come increasingly defined who we are as a nation. There were some interesting articles in the most recent Meningian by Mark McKenna and Paul Daly, and it looked at Canberra and the War Memorial. And I was just reflecting on how in Walter Burley Griffin's original vision for Canberra, Parliament House was meant to be the spiritual centre of our democracy. But over recent times, with rhetoric from our Prime Minister, who has called the War Memorial the most sacred place in our nation. And I was reflecting that this symbolism of a Prime Minister who has outdone all others in how he has publicly identified himself as a Christian, identifying this memorial to death as the most sacred space in our nation, it's just both obscene and sad. The Australian War Memorial is not simply a monument to fallen soldiers, but it's an enterprise that gathers and preserves all things to do with Australia's military engagements. It's a building an enterprise that is now heavily sponsored by the armaments manufacturers and military contractors who make their profit out of ongoing conflicts. And as Brendan Nelson said, they work out their corporate social responsibility through financing the War Memorial. It's not democracy that represents the soul of our nation, but war. And for a Christian to claim the memorialization of death rather than the celebration of life as the most sacred space is deeply disturbing. I'll not even begin to comment on what this must mean for Indigenous people and their understanding of sacred space. Australia has become, over recent decades, a significant arms exporter. None of us were asked. It happened while we were sleeping. Recent reports from the Brereton inquiry show that our overseas engagement in Afghanistan has been made up of many war crimes. And then we hear the rhetoric of military leaders and our politicians that say, this is not who we really are. We're not really like it. But the reality is this is who we have become. When it is national self-interest that becomes the measure of what is right and wrong, then this is who Australia has become. And as I've tried to outline in what is a kind of lament for our country, as a nation, Australia is currently a long way from this vision, this amazing vision that the Holy Father articulates in this encyclical. We urgently need to dislodge our national soul from its identification with war and open up it out to the possibility of a new kind of relationship, not constructed of fear and self-interest, but of openness and love. And I think this is where the heart of this encyclical and its challenge is for us as a nation. Thank you, and Cesar, sorry for being so long.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for using Fratelli Tutti to throw light on how we fail as Australia. Thank you. I'm just wondering, we have time, we can go beyond the 3:30, that 1.5 hour stretch. I'm just wondering whether you feel we should go into breakout groups or whether we just go into discussion and people can raise questions with the presenters. Just show me your hand up or something. If you feel we need to go into breakout groups, we can. If not, we omit breakout groups and go into discussion, but then bring up your questions on the chat box. so that from the chat box, we can advise the speakers what to speak about. Do you feel, just put up your hands if you feel happy with dropping breakout groups. I see a few. Okay, all right. So if before we proceed into plenary, I would like to call briefly now 2 or 3 people, give a bit of a break. Erin Green will speak briefly on a new ebook on nonviolence. Erin, where are you?
Hi, Caesar. Thank you everyone for those excellent presentations. It was really informative for me, not coming from Australia, to hear more about your context. I work for Pax Christi International, and through our Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, we've recently released a book on advancing nonviolence and just peace. And the contents of it will be of interest to everyone on this webinar, and I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with it. It contains a lot of case studies about enacting nonviolence, and also a lot of theological resources as well for thinking critically about some of the things that we've discussed today. So I'm going to put a link in the chat so that you can take a look. And we've also just added it as an ebook, so you don't even have to wait for shipping now. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Erin. Another announcement from Jasmine. Jasmine.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Cesar. So I would just like to request to everyone to please block off in your calendars the date of May 21, and it's 5 p.m. Sydney time and 7 p.m. Auckland time, because we're going to have another webinar on Fratelli Tutti. And this time, it will focus on women, peace building and disarmament. And we are inviting Archbishop Antonio Ledesma to give us, his perspectives on dialogue and peace building. And also we have invited Sister Philo Hirota from Japan to speak about women and peace building and disarmament. So please mark your calendars. That's May 21, 5 p.m. Sydney time and 7 p.m. Auckland time. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the excellent speakers this afternoon. I learned a lot from you. Maraming salamat. Thanks.
Thank you, Jasmine. I also make an announcement on behalf of Pax Christi Victoria. On June 28th, we can send details later. We have a face-to-face meeting on truth-telling. In Victoria, we have a commission established, that UROC commission, which is Truth Commission, on the impact of colonization in Australia. And it's the first time we're having such an exercise. And we are going to have a Pax Christi Agape or a gathering on the 28th of June, Sunday, 28th of June, on this Agape, and details will be made available. But if you can keep that Sunday in your diary. And also, we intend to send to all of you forms about joining Pax Christi, but you will see that in your correspondence. We can have some time for questions and discussion. There's so much rich stuff has come from the 3 speakers. You don't know where to start. But I see, for instance, there is from Rita Camilleri. She said, "Thank you so much for saying it as it is, what we have become." And I'm just wondering whether the speakers might want to say a bit more in terms of, reflection on ourselves. What have we become? The twisting that takes place, the self-interest that is put in a garb, decorated as something important and so on. But you know what is going on underneath? I mean, just taking the military situation as an example, when Australia commits over the next 10 years, something like $300 billion to upgrade our military capacity to be at the same time operational with the American forces who are already establishing a base in Darwin, and all kinds of language being used to promote it as something that is good for us. And there's a whole section of the media, somebody has raised a question about the media, that supports this line. The question is, how can Fratelli Tutti be used, can influence the life of the church, say, especially at the parish and congregational level, because in the pews, there are people who support the kind of policies that Andy and others have spoken about. How can Fratelli Tutti be used to create a space for dialogue when we all the time are planning for the future is to look at who are the enemies, in this case, China, and we spend more and more on this and the Quad, where we talked about in the last webinar. So we're taking every step, every action that we take, it goes against the very spirit of Fratelli Tutti, and we need Fratelli Tutti as urgently as it is now. So how do we, I don't know if the speakers want to say anything briefly so that we can have more questions after this. Any speaker, anyone can say what they feel about this. Or anyone else can make a comment. Just unmute yourself.
So it appears to me that the whole encyclical is premised on this idea, which is foundational to our faith, that we're there to give ourselves away, that we're not there to be self-interested. But how do you live that out as at a national level? That's as a national community. But that's what it appears that document's calling us to, is to, in our international relationships, not be putting our national interest before our collective human interest on this planet.
Thank you. Any comment? Any other comment, perhaps?
Could I just say something that's not very helpful, but it's challenging to me, and that is that people are fearful of being invaded or losing out or having troubles, and I think we have to start by addressing the fear basis on which our society functions in ways that I'm not quite sure how we go about it, but it needs to be between people with discussion about how to deal with fear that is running our country.
Yeah.
Please, somebody say something against that, or help me open a discussion.
Yes.
Kevin, could you deepen our understanding of what's fraternity mean in this document?
Yeah, good. So, I mean, he links the word social friendship with it. I think it's that simple in a way. It's about, like, for the religious person, there's the idea of fraternity flows on from the one creator. You know, we are brothers and sisters because there's one creator. So there's a sort of a religious motivation about that. But I think at least you know, look, there is a common a capacity for humans to recognise the humanness of another. You know, and there's a foundational level of that dignity that, you know, you look into the eyes of another person and you see another person, and it's precisely where those dehumanizing things are, you know, whether they're the taking away of a name or an identity or the giving of a number or whatever, it's where we see those patterns of dehumanizing or taking away the markers of being human, that I suppose the red lights start to flash, and we start to think that there might be something. Just think of the way we stigmatize, whether it's refugees or whoever. So I suppose that's sort of the criteria, that it's the recognition of the humanness, the shared humanness of the other, and then what needs to happen to make that work. And I suppose the way I sort of hear that the Pope's document is it's not even necessarily he does have that big meta-global thing, like he really calls for the renewal of the United Nations and various things, as other popes have done too. But really, it seems to me he's saying it boils down to the level of human relationships, and there will be no peace unless there are people who learn as individuals and communities how to make peace happen. That's the only way there's going to be peace, no matter how much policy there might be around it. The policy grows out of the community. So I think that relational thing is the core to that. And I suppose that's all well and good, but for plenty of people, that make, in a way, when you put your emphasis there, it makes you vulnerable to systems, whether they're economic or political or military, that are based not on the human, in a sense, not on the flourishing of the human, but on profit or force or hegemony or territorial control or whatever it might be.
Thank you, Kevin. Sorry, Claude. Claude, you had a hand up?
Oh, thank you. Look, I'm not sure this is going to help either, but just in response to Barbara and maybe even some sort of relation, what Kevin's been sharing. Look, I really think that when we're talking about fear, I think it's something oftentimes it's manufactured. It's been, we're told in a sense, or made to fear people, fear the other. And I think, for us, I think for us, we're not going to do much about the United Nations and so on, but we can do something about our personal relationships and our interactions. And one of the things I always found helpful is the teaching of Emmanuel Levinas, the Jewish philosopher, who talks about when we see the face of the other, that somehow there's a connection already. When we try to make that connection with others, and having worked with people, gay and lesbian people in the past, with the Catholic acceptance, with other groups and so on, I've always come to believe, I think that, once you get to know someone's story, and it doesn't matter whether they're people from Islamic people or something, once you get to know their story, it's very hard to hate them. And one of the challenges, I think, for Easter is that, we can become very judgmental because we see people walking around and judging them on the way they carry their wounds rather than the fact that they have wounds, and see how we might be able to engage with them and carry their wounds, carry them with their wounds. So I'm not sure that helps, but anyway, just want to,
And I think too, one of the things that occurs to me in the whole encyclical is that it doesn't just stop at solidarity. And I love the way that he moves from the call to solidarity between religions, that we need to talk to each other because of our basic faith and our common values. But then there is a call for us as religions together to make a difference. And so I saw a question about authoritarian governments, but I think as we look at Australia, that we have become more and more authoritarian, that we have been told not to engage politically. We're not supposed to be engaging politically. And I love the fact that the Pope is saying really clearly that we do have a responsibility to engage socially, politically, and economically, that is our right as citizens, but it is also a call to us as religions around the world as a duty for us to reach out. But Kevin, I had a question for you around the relationship between the encyclical and René Girard, because you mentioned that, and I think there is a significant relationship, and I'd like you to talk about that, please.
Oh, well, maybe an idea. You might say something too about it. Girard's basic thing is that mimetic nature of the human. We learn what we want by observing the desires of another, especially the other that we admire or who seems to have the fullness of life to us. And this mimetic nature generates the whole consumerist world, like our whole capitalist system is based on this mimeticism. The market shows us what we want, this bright, shiny, sexy looking thing. That's what we want. And then it creates the market and then sells it to us, so the whole commercial market rolls on sort of mimeticism. But of course, as Girard points out, the catch-22 of this mimetic nature is that inevitably our desires start to clash, and our models become rivals to us, and sooner or later the mimeticism leads to rivalry and competition and ultimately violence. And then Girard develops what he calls the scapegoat mechanism. He says archaic societies worked out a mechanism to let off the steam from these increasing rivalries by the anger and violence of all against all turns into the violence of all against one, and that one becomes the scapegoat. So of course that we see that happening again. Also, the media is the great mimetic sort of nature, and we see the scapegoating mechanism happen a lot. We see it culturally happening. The history of sort of settlement Australia is indeed the history of, in a sense, the fear of the other and the in a sense of scapegoating sort of is at work in that as well. But I think it drives into that whole thing, the wanting to be like the other nations, whether it's increased militarization, whether it's a more authoritarian approach to government and social control, the desire to be like the others. I think that's a really deep sort of thing in us. And Girard sort of points to that and says that's really the mechanism that drives human culture, and I think, people have pointed out fear and so on. A lot of that's driven by this sort of the anxiety, that the desire to be like the others. We're not wealthy enough, or we're not strong enough, or technologically, or we're not protected enough or secure enough. We've got, so the whole nuclear armament thing is a story of mimetic, rivalry. They even talk about the race, the nuclear race. So they're the sorts of things I think, Girard. But you might have some other thoughts, please.
I see a question. I see a hand up. Anne.
Thank you, Kevin. I'd like to pick up on something you mentioned there in your presentation, Pope Francis quoting, we're in a change of an era. And that question about who have we become, or what have we become, is related, I think, to that question about who are we as humans, as the human species, in relation to all the other species on our planet, and who are we as humans in relation to that whole cosmological question. And I think everything you've talked about with mimeticism and so on, who we become in Australia, it comes down to our economic system. And I think the putting together the two encyclicals, Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, they're just so key, given all the limitations that Jan's mentioned. So I think you've raised a whole lot of important points that I think I personally would love to use in small groups where I can. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. There's a question on chat box. In order to build international solidarity, must we now rethink what national leadership should be about? Maybe I'd address this question to Jan first, and then others can join in because of your studies on leadership, etc. Jan?
Sorry, would you repeat that, please, Caesar?
In order to build international solidarity, must we now rethink what national leadership should be about?
Well, it seems to me that the Pope has made it very clear in terms of who we are as human beings and the need for solidarity to see each other as sister and brother. I think what we are caught up with at the moment in terms of the reference to authoritarian governments is that we are moving very strongly away from democracies as we have known them in the past, where the leadership, I keep being a bit mesmerised, and I know it's been happening for years, but we no longer, even in Australia, talk about the coalition government. We talk about the Morrison government. We talk about the Duterte government. And so we even refer to leadership in those authoritarian, patriarchal, in church and in government, in those ways. And I think until the culture changes, and what comes first? Do we change some of our structures, which is what people on the ground are trying to do, or do we negotiate to try to build solidarity between religions, which is what the Pope is challenging us to do, to say, if you build solidarity, then maybe together we will build a better world. And it seems to me that there's an appeal there to cut across nationalistic boundaries, to engage with each other. And I live in a suburb in Sydney with a very high Islamic population, and I could really see ways that we could work together to move forward and to do that on the ground. So I think there is a huge dilemma for us with government. I think in Australia, and Andy has pointed out these really clearly, the ways that this encyclical is being contravened and contradicted in our policies, and people's feeling of inability to change policy because the government has become so increasingly dictatorial and so increasingly powerful. And if you look at cases like Bernard Collaery and Witness K, we have a classic example of injustice in this country that seems unable to be refuted and unable to be taken down. So I feel very strongly about it.
Thank you, Jan. I mean, we have reached, sorry, Murray Levy?
Yes, I'd like to raise the issue. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you? I'd like to raise the issue of Aboriginal deaths in custody, which has come up in the last couple of weeks, especially in WA. Since in the last, it was stated that in the last 10 years, that is since the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, the numbers have actually risen, not gone back, not improved. The situation has not improved. It has actually got worse since the Royal Commission. And the discussion has been on the age of incarceration. The ages between the ages of 10 to 12, it's just so shocking. I just takes my breath away. But when it comes to the point that after a Royal Commission, the numbers of deaths in custody have risen. So would you like to comment, Jan or David, isn't it?
Oh, no. I don't know whether Pat Dodson has been known to say that Aboriginal people are more likely to be noticed by the police. They are more likely to be taken in. They are more likely to be charged. They are more likely then to be convicted. Once they've been convicted, they are more likely to be jailed. And so the very pattern of racism in Australia ensures that the numbers do go up, and the numbers have gone up. And it's not only with Aboriginal people, but also with other community groups in Australia who are suffering in the same way. So I think it's a very big issue. It's a huge issue, but it's an issue of racism as well as an issue of government intervention.
Thank you.
We'll try to wind up now. It's past 3:30 Australian time. We might just take a couple of questions and then we wind up. There are people here who need to go to bed. There was an earlier question on the chat box asking, please identify evidence of religion at the service of fraternity other than Fratelli Tutti. This might be an occasion for people to share their experience in that area. Other religions helping with fraternity and with the spirit of Fratelli Tutti. The question was actually directed to Kevin, but anyone can respond from your own experience on this one.
So a little, look, I don't have a lot. I did engage with a webinar a few weeks ago about 2 o'clock in the morning in Washington, the Kroc Institute, and there was a presentation by an imam as well, and talked about how this Islamic I suppose practice and teaching also coincides with, and along with Fratelli Tutti. Look, I don't know, I have a lot of experience of this, but we have seen on the ground examples of that in recent years. And one of the most powerful ones, and it's happened in other places too, I'm sure, but it was in Egypt, in Cairo, where Muslim people, the Muslims, had protected the Christians when they were being persecuted. And this is a few years ago now, but they circled around them and tried in the. So what I'm saying is, these things are happening on the ground, and this is where the rubber hits the hits the road and so on. The other thing I wanted to say is one of the best way to kill this whole Fratelli Tutti document is to just call it a Catholic one. And I think if we just call it Catholic, we just diminish its power and its influence and everything else. And I think this is where this imam that I heard the other day, and we saw that example with the Pope, with the Sheikh in Abu Dhabi. These are inklings of saying that we're not alone. We can work with these people, and they have a lot to offer us, and we can do it together. It was Jan was suggesting earlier.
It's interesting that Laudato Si was not addressed to the church, it was addressed to the world community, wasn't it? Is that right, Kevin? What's the address of this one? Is this to the church? Talk, Kevin. You're on mute.
Demute yourself. Okay.
I was just looking that up.
Oh.
This says encyclical letter of the Holy Father Francis. So it doesn't actually nominate anybody, but as I said before, encyclicals are the big documents, and so I think we take it that it has a universal audience in that regard.
But Laudato Si was intentionally a document to the global community. Yeah.
Yes, very clearly. Yeah.
And demute yourself, unmute.
Sorry. Some examples of things I've been involved in with the Colombo Mission Institute were growing peace with Christians and Muslims, where we collaborated with local councils to put on public forums with Christians and Muslims speaking about nonviolence from their faith traditions. Other things with the Faith Ecology Network, we have multiple faith traditions involved in learning from science about ecology and then holding some examples are enrichment days where we go into the bush as different faith groups to listen and learn from Aboriginal peoples. Other examples are in our parish, we've invited faith communities from other faiths to come and share. Another one is Together for Humanity, which is a Christian, Muslim, Jewish group that goes into schools and demonstrates. So there's just a few, but there's lots and lots. There's the United Religions Initiative, which is a global network. There's heaps of them.
Thank you. And
the Sydney Alliance is a very strong group, and it comprises all Christian religions, Jewish people, Islamic people, unions. It's being developed in New Zealand and in Brisbane. Would be really good for Melbourne to have a look at it, but it's a very good model for collaboration within the community and across the community.
Another global one is the Parliament of World Religions, and in Sydney there's a youth activity called Youth Power, Parliament of, I've forgotten what, but it's a young, and they've just produced a statement called the Sydney Statement. There's lots and lots.
One last question to finish on, a question that brings us to the ground. And it says, okay, go ahead, Maggie.
Sorry, I just want to comment. I think what Anne says is really great. But the question I have is this does make no inroads to our faith leadership. Our faith leadership does not follow suit. So that's the area that I think. I know that there are individuals passionate about all of these issues, and they are really committed people, but it never gets through to the leadership. That's what I'm frustrated by.
Maggie, it does get through. Archbishop Fisher had an iftar in his house recently with all different faith traditions in the Sydney Archdiocese. They just don't get highlighted very much.
I think we need to wind up. One last question, which brings us now to the ground level, as it were. There's a question on the chat box. Does anyone on this webinar, a question directed to all, does anyone on this webinar have suggestions as to how we can use this particular event in parish groups on Fratelli Tutti, or for that matter, other material? Basically, the focus of this question is, how do we reach parishes and parish groups? Again, just a reflection. We don't have answers, and we don't expect to have an answer right now, but just your thinking on this. How can we activate the parishes a bit more on these issues?
Yeah, this is being recorded, so could we have the recording of this to have in our parishes or in the diocese or something?
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. I think any other suggestions on this question?
Could it be broken up into small parts with you know, the videos and sort of discussion groups, open questions and so on that could be to help people?
Yeah, good idea.
Mm. And the book that Arian Green was promoting earlier, a good part of it is focused on parishes. So when that book comes out, there might be some suggestions there. But in the end, you have to work with the opinion leaders in parishes to move the parish.
Caesar, Caesar, everybody, the recording, we can send the recording to everyone who's here today, and you can forward it to anybody in your parish or wherever.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks, Harry.
Sorry, I agree with Anne. I think this is too big a topic. I think breaking the presentations down would be a very excellent idea to reach a wider group of people. It's too much for them to take in the whole picture at this stage. I think a progression, even like in a series, we offer a series and boom, boom, boom. Yeah, that's my suggestion. I just think this one, there's a lot of richness in this presentation and it needs to be, I will look at it again because I found it very enlightening. So, but I'm sure that there would be many people who would find it too daunting to cover everything in one hit.
My suggestion is, if there are people in this webinar who are happy to volunteer with this task, send us your names. We can work with you. Maggie.
Yeah, I think it needs editing. It needs someone who has the skills to be able to break this up. And so yes, I will investigate my networks to see if there's someone. I can't do it myself, but you know, I may be able to identify someone, and anybody else should search their networks. This is the skill we need at this stage.
Okay.
Maybe Erin.
It's part of a duty, part of a job as communications coordinator to do that. So we will be in touch with Erin and the rest of the staff at Pax Christi International.
Well, it will be. It'll be. Erin gets it and she puts it on the Pax Christi website, so it's sort of will be distributed on the Pax Christi International network for anybody to plug into.
Very few even know about the Pax Christi website, the international website.
Oh, that's
so
true.
You have to be the intermediaries, the middlemen or women, and others to have this move. But we should think about it, definitely. Otherwise, this discussion remains in the clouds, really.
Yeah.
I'm talking about this. I think we've had a very enriching an hour and a half and a bit more. The presentations have been absolutely challenging, insightful, incisive, and also pointing to what we can do. So to each presenter, Father Kevin, Sister Jan, and Tiver, thank you so much for putting your ideas into this webinar. It has really enriched this experience for all of us. Thank you very much. Just show your hands. Okay. Next, I would like to thank all of you for coming, no matter what time of day or night it is. And I hope you're going home, feel